Our guest today is Armond White, film critic from the National Review and Out.com.
Hey, hello everybody. Thanks for inviting me. Happy to be here.
All right, so let's jump into it.
All right. Let's do it.
So you're from Detroit, right? Yes. Growing up in such a blue-collar town as Detroit, in the era for which you did grow up, what fueled your passion to become or pursue the profession that you did?
Well, when I grew up, it was a long time ago, like the 1960s. And the 1960s was, to me, it was an interesting era to grow up in because there was a lot of what I would call cultural activity. Rock and roll music had just started almost 10 years before that. And also, I feel like I'm a very fortunate person because, like I said, rock and roll had started about 10 years before that. And in the 1960s, movies, I sometimes like to say cinema, had reached a kind of peak. There were always great movies in the 20s and 30s, 40s, 50s, but in the 60s, I think the art form reached its peak. I would even say that it's been downhill since then. But the movies of the 1960s were great. So growing up in that era and having so much rich popular music and exciting movies present, I was excited by all of it. And in fact, I started out wanting to make movies, or I thought I wanted to make movies. But actually, I started out as an art student. Okay. Drawing and painting, and but I wasn't particularly good at. Well, I was okay, but I went to art school, and there were people in art school who I felt drew better than I did, and painted better than I did. But I also liked to read a lot, and I was fascinated in the '60s with reading magazines. There was a magazine culture back then where like Look magazine, Ebony magazine, Life magazine, Time magazine, but all kinds of magazines were exciting to me. I like to read as well. And I discovered a film critic named Pauline Kael who wrote for a magazine called The New Yorker, which used to be a great magazine and now is not. Even though it's still present, it's just not what it used to be. But in reading her, she would write movie reviews, and she wrote them unlike other people at the time were writing movie reviews. And I realized that movies could be written about, that popular culture could be written about in a personal way, in a readable way, and also in an insightful way, and I like that. So even though I had in my head that I probably would like to make movies, I didn't have a camera, but we did have a typewriter because my older brothers and sisters would have to type out their school papers on a typewriter. And because we had a typewriter, I started writing on the typewriter because my older brothers and sisters were writing on the typewriter. But also, I realized that I could probably try to do this thing that Pauline Kael was doing, which would be a way to express my enthusiasm for film and my interest in film by writing about them. And so I started writing, and I eventually discovered that even though I couldn't draw or paint as well as others could, that I could write pretty well. And when you discover that you can do something well, it makes you want to do it more. And that's really how I started writing criticism. And it's how I was able to personally articulate my responses to the popular music and the movies that were going on around me in Detroit in the 1960s, to get back to your question.
Let's talk about your influences. What about Pauline Kael's book, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, and Andrew Saris inspired you to most get into film journalism, more specifically, critiquing?
Well, when you read film criticism, most movie reviews tell you the plot, they tell you whether the reviewer liked it or not, and that's it. But Pauline Kael and Andrew Saris, who used to write for the Village Voice when it used to be a good publication, now it's not, they did more than that. They'd find a way, they weren't simply interested in reciting the plot and giving you an opinion about it. They would write about how it felt to watch the movie. They would write about the ideas that the filmmaker was trying to express. Andrew Sarris is an important figure to know in the history of film culture because he brought to America an idea about movies that originated in Europe, in France. And this idea is called we've kind of discussed it before, called the auteur theory. Are you guys familiar with the auteur theory? Where the idea that filmmakers work the same way that authors, that novelists work, and that in the act of creating a film, they want to express their vision of the world, express their own personal feelings, that they aren't just making product to sell, they're making art, the same way novelists make art. So the French idea is that filmmakers, directors are authors. The French word for that is auteur. And this is an idea that started among some serious French film critics in the 1950s. And Andrew Sarris kind of adopted that theory and put it in American language. And it changed the way people thought about film and filmmaking. They began to take movies more seriously, which was really a pertinent idea in the 1960s when you had very serious filmmakers like Jean-Luc Godard and Michelangelo Antonioni and Francois Truffaut. So the idea that filmmakers were artists, that they were authors, works. And that excited me to be able to look at movies not just as popcorn entertainment, but to look at them as personal expressions. And that's what Pauline Kael and Andrew Sarris did in their film criticism. They weren't just writing consumer reviews, go to see this movie, you'll have fun. They're writing reviews about movies as visions of the world, as expressions of human experience, as works of art that would give you insight into living. And that's what I responded to in their writing. And so it just so happened that in high school, when I was going to high school, we had to, in English class, write book reports. And we had a teacher who said, you don't have to write a book report on any book that's on the syllabus. Choose any book and write a book report. And I was going through a drugstore, and I saw this book on so long ago. Jesus Christ. There used to be paperback books that you could buy in a drugstore. They would be on metal racks that spun around. And I was in a drugstore, and I saw this paperback book with a movie camera on it, and it turned out to be Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And though I had read some Pauline Kael in magazines, I had not seen a book of hers before, but there it was. So I grabbed it and wrote a book report about it. And seeing all her work collected in one book was like an immersion into her vision and into her writing. And so that kind of brought me deeper into the way that she wrote about film and thought about film. In addition to picking up stuff about stuff written by Sarris. So just from their examples, I realized it was something that I wanted to do. And working on my high school newspaper and developing my writing skills, I realized that it was something I could do. And that's how I got started.
Talk about your move to New York City to attend Columbia University. What made New York City the place to be for you to study cinema culture and not Los Angeles?
Well, New York is the center of the publishing world, and which I guess is also in journalism, it's a form of publishing. So New York's the place to be. But in reality, so in Detroit, I went to school, I grew up in Detroit, went to school there. I got my bachelor's degree at a university in Detroit called Wayne State University, And I got my bachelor's degree in journalism because I wanted to be a journalist. And I got out of there in the 70s. And Detroit's an interesting town because it's the automotive capital. It was the automotive capital of the world at one point, but it was also one of the centers where Black people from the South, during the Great Migration from the South to the North, focused on industrial cities like Detroit as a place to leave the South and come and get work and raise families. So that's how my parents got there. My parents are from the South, and they came to Detroit. They met in Detroit, And so Detroit has a large population of working class people, largely immigrants from the South. So Detroit is also it's a place of a lot of activity by working class people. It's a place that's often centered on, used to be centered on working class ideas and labor issues, as well as art production, music and so forth. And despite all that, when I grew up in Detroit, there were two major daily newspapers, the News and the Free Press. And despite the large black population in Detroit, the papers at that time were largely run by white people. And despite the large black population in Detroit, in the two daily newspapers, they only employed one black writer, which is to say it was a racist institution. Which then is to say that when I graduated from Wayne State with a journalism degree, I couldn't get a job as a journalist. I worked at the phone company, which was an equally good education as 4 years of undergraduate school. But it was a different kind of education, because it was an education in learning how to be a worker and how to work with people and how to get to a job on time and do your job correctly, but mainly how to work with other people. For instance, if you should have a problem with a coworker, if you should have a problem with a supervisor, you learn how to handle it. And that may seem simple, but it's not simple, and it's also something that people need to know. I think they don't need to know it. But I was fortunate enough to get a job at the phone company and learn something about the real world. When you're in school, you're kind of in a bubble. Right. And so after getting my undergraduate degree, I got an education in the real world, and that was helpful too. But I couldn't take it. I got tired. It was frustrating to me. It wasn't what I wanted to do. So I had to figure out. You always have to figure out how do you arrive at what you want in life. And my thought was, I want to be a writer. I want to be a journalist. I can't be a journalist in Detroit. Maybe I can be a journalist elsewhere. How do I do that? And my thought was, well, I can leave, but how do you leave without a job? And I thought, well, I know what I'll do. I'll go back to school. So I decided to go to graduate school. So that's how I got to New York. I came to New York to get another degree, this time in film criticism. And I applied to Columbia and got in at Columbia and began to work on my master's degree in film criticism at Columbia University and as a New York resident. So that's what brought me here, to go to school here. And so I got my master's degree in film at Columbia, and my degree is in history, theory, and criticism. Because all of this, in my view, was going to connect with my interest in journalism and being a journalist. So when I got out of grad school, I worked places, and I eventually wound up at a black-owned newspaper called the City Sun in 1984. And I wish you guys knew about the City Sun in 1984. It was a great thing, and I say it was a great thing not just because I was working there, but it made an impact on New York City. New York City no longer has the City Sun, but they no longer have a strong black newspaper. The City Sun was begun and published and edited by a guy named Andrew Cooper and a woman named Utrice Lead. And both of them had worked for the Amsterdam News, which is still publishing. But they were disappointed and frustrated with the way with what the Amsterdam News was. They thought black journalism could be better. And so they left Amsterdam News and started their own paper, which was the City Sun. The City Sun had a motto, and the motto was speaking truth to power. And that's how the City Sun operated. Its articles were investigating politics in New York City. And one way of putting it is they were investigating the struggle of people of color in New York City. And it was a well-written, serious paper. And it was published from 1984 to 1996. And for those 12 years, it made a genuine impact. It became a force in the city. and it was a wonderful place to write. For example, one thing that it was a weekly paper, and every week there was a section of the paper called This Week in Black History. And so there was always a section of the paper that dealt with history, whereas the rest of the paper was current topical journalism that dealt with, that explored and reported on cultural events and news events and political events in the city. It was a great place to work. And it's a place that gave me a foundation, they provided a foundation for a way of writing about movies and music with a serious purpose. My idea, and the idea that was encouraged by Utrice Lead and Andrew Cooper at the City Sun, was that you don't simply look at movies and music as entertainment. You look at them for their meaning. You look at them for their social impact. And it is, I admit, a more serious approach to criticism than you get in most publications. But that's why they hired me, actually. And it's why I loved writing there, because they allowed that. A lot of publications, even on the internet, don't want serious criticism about film or music. They just want consumer criticism. But that's not what I want to do. I'm interested in writing more seriously about it. And I was able to do that at City Sun, and that's what I've pursued doing wherever I write.
For those who don't know, in 1984, you were given the job of arts editor at the City Sun here in New York. How has the cinema journalism industry changed since 1984 to 2015?
The biggest difference has to do with how reviewers or people who write about movies or music approach the production of movies or music. They tend not to, I think they tend not to think about the production. They simply want to write about the product. They tend not to think about how the product got made or what the ideas are behind the product. They simply write about the product as something that the public can buy without thinking about it. And that's a major difference. There was a time where, probably until around the 1990s, where critics, as being a part of journalism, were feared by filmmakers and musicians and playwrights and novelists. They were feared because part of the job of being a critic is to see through nonsense, is to expose phoniness, is to expose things that are bad, as well as to endorse and report on excellence. And there was a period when journalists were committed to exposing what was bad as well as promoting what was good. And in that period, filmmakers kind of feared critics. And sometimes that fear carries contempt as well. But that's how it used to be. Somewhere around the late 80s, things changed, and studios and their publicists, who they hired to promote their work, took over. They began to assert their authority in many different ways by withholding access to film screenings, withholding access to new record albums, unless a writer would agree to praise it. And oddly enough, many writers knuckled under. And so there was a switch around the late 80s where publicists became more powerful than film critics. Film critics were no longer feared. Film critics were used and manipulated. And that's the major change. And as a result, you have very few critics who are critics anymore. They're just boosters and promoters and kind of hype meisters. You know, they hype everything rather than criticizing it. And this is bad because people need to think about art. I believe they need to think about what it means, what it's saying, where it comes from, and where it's going. I could go on. So I like to write about. I'll get it to my point this way. I like to write about music as well as movies, and because I enjoy pop music too. And during the 1980s, sorry, I'm an old guy. During the 1980s, it was a great period for pop music. I mean, you had people like Michael Jackson, you had groups like Public Enemy, and you also had a lot of great British pop musicians and bands. The 80s is a wonderful period, and part of what was wonderful about it is that you had musicians who would question the status quo. They questioned the way things are, which is always good for anybody to do. You know, don't just accept things as they are. Try to understand them, and if you don't think it's right, question it and try to make it better. And a lot of pop musicians did that, and there was a group in the 80s, a British group called Scritti Politti, and the name is a reference to an Italian political movement. It translates as a fun way of saying political writing. And this group Scritti Politti made beautiful music that also was kind of political as well. And there's a Scritti Politti song that says, "How come no one ever told me who I'm working for?" And this just thrilled me. I thought this is wonderful that somebody could make that proposal in a pop song, in a song that sounds good to listen to, makes you want to dance, but it's asking a serious question. How come no one ever told me who I'm working for? Which is not just an idea about, you know, who's your supervisor and who's signing your check, but who I'm working for in terms of what is my work leading to? Why do I have to work? What's the purpose of working? It's a major question posed in a pop song, and that thrills me. And I think that's the kind of question that a critic should be asking. I actually think it's the kind of question that people should ask themselves every day. You know, who am I working for? Why am I doing it? What's the point of it? Ask yourself that not as a way of giving up or resigning from things, but just to try to get a better grasp of the world and the way things work. Too often, I think people don't try to consider the way the world works, and they ought to. And that doesn't have to be dull and serious. It can be exciting and fun, as in a Scritti Politti record, as in a very good movie.
You've also critiqued music, more specifically, your opinions on Kanye West, Kendrick Lamar, and Michael Jackson. Would you classify yourself as an overall art critic, or does the art need to stand out enough for you to cover it?
Well, no. The way I work is if something interests me, it makes me want to write about it. So if a movie comes my way and it interests me, I want to write about it. If a piece of music comes my way and it interests me, I want to write about it. It's generally part of the way I respond to things, only largely because it's the way I am, it's the way I think, and it's my job as well. So if by standing out you mean does it have to be a work by a well-known artist? Not necessarily. I like to write about movies by people who are unknown if it interests me. Not just write about Hollywood movies with large ad campaigns. It just so happens that, I don't listen to music as much as I used to, and so maybe the things that come to me are the things that are in the mainstream. So that's how I got to Kendrick Lamar as opposed to, who are those guys from, who did that song about strippers called Fight Night? Migos. Yeah, Migos. Yeah, as opposed to Migos. So, okay. So, Kendrick and Kanye, they're better known than Migos, but sometimes something like Migos comes my way and I'm interested in that. I just haven't had the chance to write about Migos yet, but I want to. And so if it interests me, I want to write about it. Whether or not it's hyped, doesn't matter.
Your recent review of Dope mirrored your comparison of Kanye West's Runaway to Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan. You comparatively used To Pimp a Butterfly as reference material in juxtaposition to Dope. What's your opinion on the current landscape of hip-hop?
I don't know as much, frankly, I don't know as much about it as I used to. I don't follow it as closely as I used to.
Well, you know the Migos is more than I
Yeah, well, I try to follow it because, you know, pop music is a pleasure, is a love for me. But I just can't keep up anymore because, you know, in that TV series that used to be good called The Simpsons, there was an episode where Homer is playing his music for Bart and Lisa, and they don't like his music, and this distresses Homer. So he goes to goes to Abe Simpson, his father, and he says, you know, they don't like my music, and Abe Simpson explains why. He says, Homer says, I'm not hip anymore. What happened? And Abe Simpson says, you know, well, I used to be hip, and then they changed what hip was. Now what's hip is strange and scary to me. It will happen to you. And this is a truth because it just happens. It's part of life. You know, a lot of pop music is made by young people and made for young people. And as you get older, it's not for you anymore. And though, you know, I feel like I have a you know, my brother used to call me the world's oldest teenager. Even though I feel like I have a teenager's heart in my enthusiasm for pop music, I recognize it's not for me anymore. And as a result of that, like Homer Simpson, a lot of times, and like Abe Simpson, there's stuff I can't hear. I hear it, but I don't get it. And I think it's just a part of being older, growing older. You have your period. I guess my period was from the 60s to the 90s, and it's not that anymore. But I'm still interested, and so when I hear stuff that I'm interested in, you know, I want to write about it. When I heard My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, I was just thrilled and wanted to write about it, and I found that to be more exciting than Black Swan. But that's always been my attitude of you know, you have choices to make. You have options. You can spend 2 hours watching a movie that bores you, or you can listen to a piece of music for 3 minutes that makes your day. And I'd rather hear a good 3 or 4 minute record than sit through a bad movie. And part of the reason why I write these pieces that sometimes compare music to movies is to sort of, you know, give people that idea of their options. That you don't have to watch a bad movie. You got great music you can listen to. And that's always an option. You know, we live in a we live in a world of cultural options, and why not partake of them all? We don't have to stick with one art form. You can love music, you can love movies as well, but you certainly don't need to ever be bored. And connected to that is the idea that you know you can see movies, you can hear music that you don't like. Right. You have a right not to like it. And you should have you know. You should take the opportunity to reject things that aren't good enough.
It is said that you disagree with your colleagues to stir the pot a little. I'm sure your take on it is different. What makes you so different from some of the current critics out there?
The same thing that makes me different from you and from you. I am me. And you know, there's an old song called I Gotta Be Me. I gotta be me. I have to write about the things that interest me, and I have to see things, I have to be honest about that. I mean, it's implicit when you read a piece of criticism. What is the first thing you see when you look at a review online or in a newspaper? What is the first thing you see?
Some kind of score, stars.
Well, no, but think about it. What is the very first thing you see when you start to read an article? Below the title. Okay, second thing you see. Below the title. What's the second? Yeah, you see their name. You see their byline. That means this is by Armond White. This is Armond White's point of view. It's not your point of view. It's my point of view. When I worked at the phone company and got my real life education, I remember there was a woman who worked there named Cassandra, and she's very tough, and she would always talk back to supervisors. I don't recommend it, but she would. And I remember she would have, when a supervisor would criticize her or give her advice, Cassandra would say, "You walk your shoes over there, I'll walk my shoes over here." That appealed to me, but it's not always wise. It's not a wise thing to do. I don't advise it. I'm just saying, you know, Cassandra was risking her own job when she did it, but I like the sound of it, frankly. And so I walk in my shoes. I can't walk in anybody else's shoes. I sit in my chair, you know, like the De La Soul song. I put my hand in my air. It's me. It's me. I can't write for other people. I can't look at movies for other people. I can only give my opinion. And the hope is that my opinion, the way I analyze a movie or take it apart or whatever I have to say about it, is always from me. But hopefully, it will give you an idea. It will help you to think more about it. That's the point. And I don't believe that many of my colleagues see it that way. I think many of them are under the delusion that they're just writing about movies. They're writing about a fun piece of entertainment, and they're just looking to have fun like everybody else. I want to have fun, but I believe that movies are an art form. And I believe that there are ideas in films that need to be dealt with, as well as the politics behind who made it, and that need to be considered. And I recognize that a lot of people who write movie reviews just don't think about it that way. And that's okay, because everybody does their own thing. But my thing is to take movies seriously, and that's the major difference.
You are also an expert in gay cinema. What has changed in gay cinema through the lens of a critic since you've become a journalist?
Well, that's an interesting question, and my answer to that would be nothing, because whether you're a gay filmmaker, whether you're a straight filmmaker, whether you're a woman, whether you're black, whether you're Indonesian, whether you're Sri Lankan. I met a great Sri Lankan filmmaker at the Miami Film Festival about 6 years ago. You're still doing the same thing. You're trying to manifest your vision. You're trying to make a good work of art, and this is the objective of a filmmaker of a gay filmmaker like Ian Patrick Polk or Gus Van Sant, and it's the same objective of Jean Cocteau back in the 30s, the same objective of Luchino Visconti in the 40s and 50s, they were all gay. It's the same objective. Nothing's changed. The object is to do good work. The object is to honestly express human experience and human connection. The object is to make a work of art, and that hasn't changed. What has changed is the media attitude, the popular attitude towards it, and that's often questionable. People like to think that just because something new that it's good. Not necessarily. I don't think. I don't think, for instance, that a Gus Van Sant movie like Milk, or God, what's that last junk he did? The movie Jerry with Matt Damon and Casey Affleck. Just because it's made by a gay filmmaker recently doesn't make it any good. None of those films can touch Visconti's La Terra Trema or Session or Cocteau's Orpheus. So the popular attitude, the media attitude, the mainstream media attitude is that things have changed. Things haven't really changed. Not if you know anything about film history, not if you know anything about gay history, which is to say human history. Nothing's really changed. The work of making good art is always a struggle, and we don't have to accept stuff just because it's new or just because it's there. And same thing applies to women filmmakers and to black filmmakers. You have an example like Selma, which is to me utterly mediocre in every way. People like to talk about Ava DuVernay, and her effort is good. She's serious about what she does. Did I get in trouble here? She's serious about what she does, but the movie isn't up to snuff. She hasn't made a film as great, for example, as Melvin Van Peebles' Sweet Sweetback, or even maybe more to the point, Melvin Van Peebles' Panther, which is a movie about the history of the Black Panthers, which is a movie which is vibrant to watch, and which has credible performances of characters of individuals who actually existed, but they're exciting. They're exciting to watch, and you believe them. And Melvin Van Peebles, he seems to in that film, he captures the tone of an era, but mostly he captures the passion of, of those young people who started the Black Panther Party. And that's a special gift. Not all filmmakers have it. God bless Ava DuVernay and her efforts. But, you know, if you know Panther, you know that there's better stuff out there. And so just because she's a woman, just because she's black, is nice, but she still has to make good art. And that's not a slam on her. That goes for everybody of every persuasion.
What's the movie you look back now and think, man, maybe I was a little too harsh in my critique of the movie?
I could probably come up with one or two, but it doesn't happen often. Why not be hard on it?
Right.
You know, you guys know the group Public Enemy? I know it's old. They made a song called "Burn Hollywood Burn." And there's a moment in the song where Chuck D said, where they talk about what was then a current film called "Driving Miss Daisy." No, it's Steel Magnolias, I think. And Chuck says that he has no interest in seeing that. He says, "I'm tired of giving these movies my money. I work hard for it," and that appealed to me too. My time is worth something to me. And if I feel that a filmmaker has wasted my time, I will be harsh about it. Why not? You wasted my time. But even worse than that, you know, I've decided to give him my time anyway, so that's on me. But worse than that is when they waste my time with what I think is something that is false, something that is nonsensical, or something that's not up to stuff artistically. Right. Really, another way I approach this, what I do, is that you know, I went to film school, and I've watched movies for a long time, and so I have a background of film going, and I know what good is. I know what good is not because watching a movie, because I've seen a movie and it's given me pleasure. I know what good is because I've seen examples of what's good. I mean, you know, that's how you judge. That's how you critique, because you have an example to go by. Because I've seen great movies, I can't tolerate anything less, and so I don't see any point in tolerating anything that's less than great, because I know the great is out there. I can always go see. I always go see Passion Joan of Arc, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or Nashville, or MASH. I can always go to that. I don't have to settle for the new thing that's no good. And there's a lot of stuff that's no good. And you know, there is you know, films over 100 years old now, about 120 years old now, as an art form. And there's a lot of great movies that will still speak to you if you go and see some of these older films. Why should you go see something new? Well, you should see things that are new, but why should you accept something just because it's new when you've got great stuff that you can always look at and have a better experience with, frankly? Same thing with books, same thing with music. I'll be controversial. Why should you listen to Taylor Swift when you can listen to Joni Mitchell, you know, or Dionne Warwick or Aretha Franklin? Why should you? I mean, you can, and it's not a crime, but there's better stuff out there. There's better stuff out there, and you should know the better stuff. I think Taylor Swift would like you to know Joni Mitchell, and you'll have a richer life if you do.
Do you see any ethnic diversity of film critics in the business? How do you think this affects the film culture?
I don't think it's really changed much in terms of diversity. Mm-hmm. It tends to primarily be, the profession of criticism tends to primarily be a profession of white folks. For whatever reason. One reason certainly being that institutions of journalism would prefer to hire them. That's a truth. So it tends to be largely white people. So there's not much diversity going on there. And then you have the internet, which seems to have opened things up. So there are all kinds of people writing all kinds of things on the internet. They may not really be critics. Right. They may just be bloggers. So in a sense, you get I guess you get more diversity in people writing about film on the internet. But then you have to ask, is it any good? And that's one of the lessons that I learned at City Sun, where I said before that the publisher and editor of the City Sun were people with political conviction and people with journalistic standards. And they had no time for anything less than the best from journalism, and particularly from black journalists. So there are like websites now, some black websites like Shadow and Act, which just I think what they do is unacceptable. I think it cannot be considered real criticism. It's just there to promote certain kinds of movies, and that's particularly offensive to me because they don't promote all kinds of movies. They just promote certain kinds of movies by filmmakers of color, and they seem to have no standards, and that's unfortunate. My point is that diversity is well and good, but even in journalism, excellence matters. Just because you belong to a certain political group, or ethnic group, or gender group, or whatever, that doesn't matter if you're not doing good work. You have to do good work. You have to do good work as you know. That's your obligation. That's your obligation to the world. Don't make crap. You know, that's your obligation to the world. Do something and do it well. Do it well. One thing I learned at Columbia, I took as part of my film education at Columbia, I was there for history theory criticism, but you also had to make movies. You also had to take production classes, and you also had to take screenwriting classes. So I took a screenwriting class with a screenwriter named Samson Rafelson. And Samson Rafelson wrote some of the best movies to ever have come out of Hollywood. Films like Shop Around the Corner, films like Trouble in Paradise, films like the original Heaven Can Wait. If these titles don't mean anything to you, you should search them out. They are extraordinary films. I didn't know that at the time. When I was just taking a screenwriting course with Samson Rafelson because it was required of me. And at that time, Samson Rafelson was a very old man. He was I think he was in his 80s at that point. But he was, he's still mentally nimble, so he could teach a class. And in teaching screenwriting, he had us watch various films. And one day he assigned us to watch a film that he wrote. And I went to the Museum of it was playing at the Museum of Modern Art, and so I went to see Trouble in Paradise. And when I saw Trouble in Paradise, the next class session was Samson Rafelson. I was ready to bow. I thought, this man is great, and I didn't know it. Trouble in Paradise is still one of the greatest films ever made. You need to see it. And in class, Rafelson would show different films. And one time he showed us It Happened One Night, which was the Academy Award-winning best film of 1934 with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. And he began to, after he showed us the film, he went through the screenplay and he tore it apart. And he went through it line by line, showing us what was bad about it. and this was amazing. This is amazing. And I because the kind of student I was, I said, why are you doing that? I said, why are you doing that? I said, this film won an Academy Award. This film has been popular for years. I said, and there are scenes in it that work. I said, there are scenes that are very charming, very funny. And I gave him an example of one scene. And he said, yeah, but was that the best they could do? And that shut me up. Because his point was that you have to, whatever you do, try to make it the best that you can. And I was willing to accept It Happened One Night as an entertainment that worked on a simple level. But Rafelson said, is that the best they could do? And that thought has echoed in my head ever since. You know, as a critic, you're looking for the best. And you don't simply have to be a critic to look for the best. As a viewer, and certainly as makers, you want to go for the best. You don't want to make an okey-doke movie. You want to make the best movie you can. And you know, you have to work at it too. You know, you don't settle for your first draft. You work on the draft until you get it better. Right. And it's that idea of excellence that I try to keep in mind when I'm writing. When I'm writing about a movie, it's the idea I try to keep in mind when I'm doing my own writing too. I could never turn in a first draft because you know that's not the best I can do. I have to work on it some more and make it better. That idea.
Would you say that this class at Columbia was one of the things that helped shape maybe your writing style or your perception on the industry that you wanted to work in?
Sure. Oh yeah, yeah. Yes. Well, I'll go back to Rafelson, in fact. So I was taking the screenwriting class with Samson Rafelson, and the first assignment was not to write a scene or write a character description or write dialogue. The first assignment was to write an essay. And the essay that he assigned was, well, the first assignment was to write an essay. And my thought, this is before I saw it Trouble in Paradise. My thought is, what's wrong with this old guy? Why do I have to write an essay in a screenwriting class? But the subject of the essay had to be, who am I when I watch a movie? So I went home and started working on the essay. And as I worked on the essay, I thought, he's wise. He has wisdom. Because that's a crucial question. And I think it's a question that people don't ask themselves. You know, who am I when I watch a movie? Because I think it's the kind of question, it goes back to that question I mentioned before by Scritti Politti. How come no one ever told me who I'm working for? Who are you when you watch a movie? And what are you looking for when you watch a movie? What do you expect from a movie? What does a movie give you that benefits who you are in this world? Is it helping you at all? Is it just escapism that is only good for the minute? Or is it helping you live? Is it helping you think? Is it giving you sustenance? When you ask yourself that question, who am I when I watch a movie? I think well, for me, certainly, it changed the way I thought about what I do and what I write about. It made me ask more of movies. It made me ask more of music. It made me ask more of everything. It also made me discover myself. And that's serious stuff, folk. And you will spend your life discovering yourself. But it's necessary to do. Otherwise, you walk around foolishly, without thinking about anything, without thinking about others, and that's not good. So, my hat is off to Samson Rafelson because he asked us to do that assignment, which at first seemed to have nothing to do with screenwriting, but in the end, it has everything to do with everything I do.
For any young film student that loves the culture, what advice would you give as to what makes a good film critic?
Well, just to keep thinking. I think think. Don't just do stuff, think about it. Think about how honest your work is. If you're truly expressing yourself, or are you doing it for somebody else? Think about that. Think about what its impact might be. And then you have to ask yourself, I think, a crucial question. After you choose the work that you want to do, the work that you're interested in, then you have to ask yourself, do you want to be successful, or do you want to be good? Because sometimes they two don't go together. In Citizen Kane, there's a line in Citizen Kane where some character says, there's no trick to making a lot of money if all you want to do is make a lot of money. If all you want to do in life is make a lot of money, you can do that in many different ways and do it probably well and with some ease, maybe. If you just want to make money, you can make money. But if you want to be good, that might entail a sacrifice, a struggling artist sacrifice. But you have to ask yourself, do you want to be successful, or do you want to be good? And there's a difference. Not everybody who's successful is good. You don't have to envy people just because they make money. We all need money to live. I'm not, I got my feet on the ground about that. We all need money to live, but I want to be good at what I do, and I want to do good work. And that's a question that everybody has to ask themselves. I should leave it at that, but then I got to add, this is one thing that motivates me as a critic. I see movies that just are not good enough, and I realize they just did this for the money. And that's nice for them, but it doesn't do anything for me. And when I go to the movies, I want a movie that gives me something. And in my own work, I want the work to be good.
So we have some questions here from some of the honor students. I'm just going to read through them.
Sure.
All right. This question is by Olivia. What's the biggest misconception about critics?
The biggest misconception, I think, is that they don't like what they're writing about. Probably the classic example of that comes from this 1950 movie called All About Eve. Anybody here know that one? Yeah. And there's that critic character called Addison DeWitt, and he's referred to as a venomous fishwife, and he's just nasty and acerbic to everybody. And people like that view of critics. They think that critics are parasites, and they think that critics don't like what they do and that they're envious. People have said to me, you're just a frustrated filmmaker. And I'm not at all. I believe that criticism is its own justifiable form. It's another pursuit of art. It's another kind of art. When you write a piece of criticism, you're writing a literary work, and you're putting something new into the world that wasn't there before. That's the basic definition of art. So I don't think of critics as parasites, and I enjoy the mediums I write about, media I write about. I'm not envious. I like to critique them.
This is from Jocelyn. With the technological advances in today's society, there are millions of comments on almost every website. What do you think it is about your critiques that attract today's masses to read them?
To read? Oh, well, I hope it's that what I write is interesting. And my whole purpose in writing criticism is that I feel this is related to what I said about writing for the City Sun and its motto, speaking truth to power, is that I feel that there are things that need to be said that nobody's saying. And also, frankly, I don't see a point in writing movie critiques if I'm going to say what everybody else is saying. Everybody's saying it, why bother? Why add to that chorus? I think because I'm writing from my own personal perspective, and I see things the way I see things, that's what's not being disseminated out there. And so because I have something that I feel is different from what other people have to say, that's all the more reason to do it, to write it. You don't need more reviews telling you what you've read everywhere else. Why bother?
Armond, thanks for talking to me today. It was a pleasure talking to you. Guys, if you haven't checked out any of his writings, check it out, especially the last piece of work, the Dope and To Pimp a Butterfly critique and comparison he did. Definitely check that out. Again, everybody give a round of applause for
All right, well, thank you.